PharmaCannis has a really impressive patient outreach program that I can really get in line with. They send Liz Elliott and Michael Richards out to educate patients, and they host these patient education programs all across Illinois for free. They educate patients on what medical marijuana is and how you use it. What are the forms? How can it benefit you? How does it work in your body? And why is this good for you? And even if you don't become a patient of one of their dispensaries, they're still out there educating people on how it can benefit you. And as an advocate, I really like that. It's just a really aggressive, progressive, forward-thinking company, and I'm so impressed with PharmaCannis. So I'm really, really pleased to have them here. I'm pleased to call them my friends. Please welcome Liz Elliott and Michael Richards.
We are absolutely honored to be a part of this program. As Gracie mentioned, that was me. As Gracie mentioned, we are a medical marijuana provider here in Illinois. Our headquarters is in Oak Park, Illinois, and we have 4 dispensaries, one in Evanston, Schaumburg, North Aurora, and Ottawa. We also have 2 cultivation centers, one in Dwight and Hillcrest, Illinois, making us actually the largest medical marijuana provider here in the state. We also have the same setup in New York as well. My background, I was in dental and pharmaceutical sales for about 10 years. I came on board with PharmaCannis about a little over a year ago when licensure became approved here. And I cannot begin to tell you what we've seen, and Mike's going to get into this a little bit more. But I say this, there's one particular, as Gracie mentioned, we do educational seminars all over the state, educating patients on this new program here. There's one particular, and we have so many stories, but there's one particular story. I did a seminar in North Aurora back in October. A patient came in to the seminar. She had severe MS. She was in a wheelchair. She was on a lot of medication. She applied for the card, got her card. I happened to see her in our North Aurora dispensary. She was on cannabis for about 2 weeks and walking into our dispensary on a walker. And that's just one story. We have so many stories that we can share. So what I'm going to do is, Mike is actually a patient of cannabis here with PharmaCannis. So he has a wonderful story to tell. So he's going to tell his story, go into a little history and some science behind cannabis, and then I'm going to touch on the actual program and how patients actually can apply for the card. So take it away, Mike.
Cool. Thank you, Liz.
Do you want me to click or no? You're good?
No, let me get caught up here. So creating your wellness success story. Liz hit it right on the head. We could stand up here for hours and tell about the patients that we have seen, not just getting out of pain, not just getting well, but changing their lives. So, Liz told her story. There's a gentleman that I started with. I started as a patient care rep before I do education outreach with what we do here. So I consulted with him in our Schaumburg dispensary. When he started with us, he was on 10 Vicodin and 4 Oxycontin every day. Does that sound familiar, right, as far as pain pills? And really, I mean, looking at, opiates and, taking these pills, it's not uncommon for people to get to those doses, but the sad thing about it is that they're not even getting the relief. So this gentleman, 10 Vicodin, 4 Oxycontin, put him on a cannabis regimen, saw him a couple months later, and he came up to me and gave me a huge hug. He was like, Mike, you will never believe this. I have been on the cannabis regimen. I am completely off all my opiates. Completely off all of his opiates. And this is just one of many stories that Liz and I see. We are fortunate to do what we do. We thank Gracie for having us here, and also a shout out to our other colleagues in the industry. I mean, we are pioneers. We are fighting for this program, and the patients and everybody here in the room is why the program is where it is right now. People are experiencing relief. People are getting, their lives back, and they haven't had this in years, sometimes decades. So just a little bit more about me. I was actually 360 pounds at my heaviest. So I lost 160 pounds, proper diet, exercise. I learned to be obese from my father. So my dad was 400 plus pounds. He had his first heart attack at 40, his second one at 45, and his third and final one at 52. He also had a spinal cord injury, which is one of the qualifying conditions that we have here in the Illinois Medical Cannabis program. But just as a kid, vivid memories. I remember my dad, he used to love fishing. He used to love tying flies. And as a kid, I would come see him in his office, and I always wondered to myself, what are all these little orange bottles that I see lining the shelves, right? Nowadays, we know pharmaceuticals, but 25, 30 different medications. Growing up as a kid, I remember vividly, other families, they would be going on vacation. They would be doing, fun things on the weekends where I would be going to visit my dad in the hospital. So it really affected my life, his health, but more importantly, it educated me to say to myself, I don't want this for my life. I want to make a change. So I lost 160 pounds, changed my life, saved my life. I've been very fortunate where others have brought me along to help create their wellness success stories over my 15-year career. Something very interesting happened. About 3 years ago, I started getting some pretty bad stomach pains. Is anybody in the room familiar with pain? Right? I knew the answer to that one. But started getting some really, really bad stomach pains. Finally got to the point where I had to go to the doctor, and immediately they said, pain, opiates. Sound familiar? Pain, opiates. So I started on the opiate regimen, followed that for about a year, and then after a year, I realized, okay, my stomach is 10 times worse than it was a year prior, and now I have this opiate addiction to deal with. Sound familiar? Very common when dealing with pain. So I was very fortunate again. I got myself off the opiates. Unfortunately, my stomach continued to get worse. It got to the point where in the middle of 2015, I was bedridden. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't work. I was the sickest that I've ever been in my life. I was the most scared that I've ever been in my life. Started the whole process again, accessed the healthcare community. They did their whole medical workup, and they diagnosed me with Crohn's disease. So Crohn's disease, it's an autoimmune disease. It's one of the qualifying conditions that we have here in the Illinois Medical Cannabis program. Initially, when I was diagnosed, my medical team told me that I would be on Remicade infusions for the rest of my life. So they said, no matter where you're at, no matter who you're with, you could be on vacation, you're going to have to find one of these infusion centers, you're going to have to sit there for 4 or 5 hours, and you're going to have to get your medication forever, the rest of your life. I didn't like that. I knew that cannabis was something that we had here in Illinois. I knew the efficacy of cannabis with treatments of autoimmune diseases, and I decided to become a medical cannabis patient. Knock on wood, I use cannabis every single day. I've been on cannabis for about 8 months now, and I am managing my symptoms. Like the other people were saying, all these conditions that we're talking about, these chronic conditions, it's not like they go away. These things aren't little coughs and colds. It's not like my Crohn's disease is cured. But at the same time, I'm managing my symptoms every day. I'm not on medications. I went back to my doctor for the first time almost a month ago, and they are blown away. They don't understand how not following the biologic regimen that they gave me, how just using cannabis, I went from having ulcers through my large intestine, my small intestine, my duodenum, I was anemic, I was bleeding, going from that state to functionally walking into their office months later without taking the drugs, blown away. So my story, it has saved my life. It has changed my life. Without PharmaCannis and the medical cannabis program, I wouldn't be standing here talking to anybody today. Liz and I have seen hundreds of patients benefit from this, and definitely, leaving here today, please help us spread the word. It's another treatment option out there. The one thing that we're seeing most with patients is that not only are they getting benefit, but it's giving them hope. A lot of these people that Liz and I deal with, they have been through the medical gamut. They have seen 5, 10, 20 different specialists. They have been on 5, 10, 20 different medications. So having this option, having another opportunity, having the hope is there. And that's what Liz and I are here to talk about today. All right, cool. So the history of cannabis. So cannabis has been around for over 5,000 years. It was first documented back in Central Asia, and it's very interesting because this plant has followed us as humans as we've spread throughout the globe. There's documented cases of cannabis, finding cannabis in the pharaoh's tombs in ancient Egypt. In the 1500s, early 1600s, Queen Elizabeth, she used cannabis to treat her menstrual cramps. So this has been a huge predominant part of culture for thousands and thousands of years. It was first brought to the US in the late 1500s, early 1600s. It was one of the biggest crops that we had here along with cotton. It was used for so many things. It was used for food, it was used for fuel, it was used for textiles, it was used for rope, it was used for clothing, but more importantly, it was used for medicine. So what you're looking at up there is what's called a tincture. So a tincture is a liquid that's infused with cannabinoids. So fast forward to the late 1800s, early 1900s, cannabis was medicine. Physicians were using this. Companies like Lilly and Merck were making this. They were stocking pharmacies with this. Cannabis was actually added to the US copia in 1850. So the same way that you go to Walgreens today and you get your prednisone, you get your opiates, you would go to the pharmacy and you would get your cannabis. They had over 28 different strains, different varieties, but the most important thing is that they were using tinctures. This is what they were using back in the day. So definitely, I mean, cannabis has been a huge part of what we've been doing for thousands of years as humans. Very interesting, in the 20s, 1930s, a huge propaganda campaign was put together. Is anybody familiar with the movie Reefer Madness? Has anybody heard of that? So,
It was on TV a few weeks ago.
was it really just recently? I had to brush up before I came here, and I watched it just recently. Watching it nowadays, it's a comedy to see, but just thinking about how that movie is made and thinking in the 1930s, like imagine viewing this movie in the 1930s. Basically, it demonized cannabis. It said that it altered who you were. It said that it made you crazy. It made you do dangerous and stupid things. I mean, this was what was presented to us, in the 30s as a propaganda campaign. As far as the etiology where this propaganda campaign came from, some people say it was, the oil industry and the paper industries. They were threatened by what hemp and what cannabis was able to do, so they put together this campaign. Other people say that they wanted to give a negative connotation to the immigrants that were coming over the border, and marijuana was a big part of their culture, so they associated cannabis with the immigrants. Regardless of what the reason was, what it led to was in 1937, they passed something that was called the Marijuana Tax Act. So basically, the Marijuana Tax Act stated that physicians could still prescribe marijuana, but they had to pay a tax, they had to buy a stamp, they had to put it on the bottle. So if anybody's familiar, if you've seen like a pack of cigarettes or a bottle of alcohol, none of us have seen any of those things, right? No, just kidding. But anyways, you look on those things, those little stamps, those little tax stamps, that's exactly what they were looking for in 1937. So, and looking back at the research and the history of it, the tax that they were required to pay was $1 for every ounce of cannabis that they would prescribe, which back in 1937, that was a lot. That was a lot of money, $1 for an ounce of cannabis. So what happened was that led to the decline of cannabis as medicine. It was actually removed from the pharmacopoeia in 1942. So this propaganda campaign, and a lot of us, unless we were born prior to 1937, all we know of is cannabis as being illegal, being wrong to use, being demonized. It's something that alters our perception. So this is what we know, and because of the change that they made in 37. Fast forward to 1970. So in 1970, Richard Nixon was in presidency and wanted to do something about the drug problem. So he put together what's called scheduling of drugs. So we have 5 different schedules. What we're going to talk about here today is Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. But basically, Schedule 1 are things that are highly addictive and have no medicinal benefit. So looking through the list, and this was something that was just in the news and the media on Friday, right? Has anybody heard about the rescheduling, right? How they were talking about the rescheduling of the cannabis. So that's why this is so important, because unfortunately, if marijuana stays in that Schedule 1, can't study it. Now, there are little pockets, and we're seeing changes come around. I mean, there's people that are starting to have research coming out. University of Michigan just did a study with 160 pain patients showing that patients that got on cannabis decreased their opiate usage by over 64%. So fortunately, I mean, we're finally at a point. California was first medically a state in 1996. So we're at a point where we're finally getting a little bit of research, but at the same time, we can't study it the way that we could. I've heard a lot from the doctors that presented before me today, with some of these treatments, there's not a lot of research, right? I've heard pretty much a lot of the doctors say there's not a lot of research. There's promising subjective data from patients, but at the same time, the research hasn't caught up to that. Same thing with cannabis. And what's very interesting, while cannabis, while we demonized it in the United States, other countries were studying it. Israel, Spain, UK. While we're sitting here saying, cannabis, don't want to use this, negative, these countries are studying it, they're finding medicinal benefit, they're finding efficacy for this medication. So, unfortunately, in the US, we haven't caught up yet. So that's the Schedule 1. Schedule 2, you see substances, and what they classify for Schedule 2 are these are things that are potentially high rate of addiction, but have medicinal benefit. right? So it's very interesting because to just put this whole thing into perspective, a lot of these things on here, morphine, methadone, Oxycontin, addiction rate is anywhere between 17 to 29%. If you look at cannabis, cannabis has the addiction rate similar to that of caffeine, about 9%, right? So, just looking at this, it doesn't really make sense. Hopefully, things will catch up and that'll get rescheduled. And even looking at the opiates, opiates, the last statistic I read about that, 44 people die a day from opiate overdoses. 44 people are dying a day. A statistic from the Journal of American Medicine that came out is that states that have medical cannabis programs, 25% lower opiate overdoses in those states. So states with a medical cannabis program have a 25% lower fatality rate from opiates. So it just doesn't make sense why marijuana is in that Schedule 1. All right, so to put it even more in perspective, we have things, tobacco and alcohol, that weren't even scheduled during this time. Tobacco kills almost 500,000 people a year. Alcohol, 125,000. Now that's just people that are drinking too much. That's not people that are drinking, getting behind a wheel. That number would be almost triple if we had that. So like we said, to put it in perspective. Now as far as cannabis, does anybody know how many people die from cannabis a year? Zero. None. I'll pay you that $1 later, Gracie. Right, cool. Nobody dies from cannabis because it's a very safe profile, which is what we'll get into in a little bit, but there's a science behind why you can't overdose from it and why it's one of the more safer medications that you can use. All right, so just to validate some of those statistics, the CDC, you could find the statistic 44 people die every day from an opiate overdose. On the DEA's website, you could find the information about no deaths of overdose of marijuana has ever been reported. So factual stuff that we're looking at. And what physicians are saying. So, and we have physicians in the room. We could definitely ask them after the presentation what they're saying. But Sanjay Gupta was a physician that was anti-cannabis. What he did is he did a special with CNN where basically, he thought, no medicinal benefit, there's no place for cannabis in medicine, until he started talking with people overseas that were researching it. Until he started talking with patients that were actually getting benefits from it. So if anybody's familiar with like the Charlotte's Web story or like the little kids that are taking the CBD oil for seizures. So he did his research, and at the end of the special, he basically came out and said, I was wrong. There's medicinal benefit to this. There's efficacy to this. People are benefiting from this. And he's just one. Liz and I have been doing this for quite a long time, and we're seeing the physicians change. A lot of them, thought that they were writing a prescription initially, where they didn't know that they were just certifying that you have one of these qualifying conditions. So, we're educating people, and people are coming around. We're seeing the physicians come around too. And the fact, I think, that Gracie invited us here just shows how people are coming around. The fact that we're able to present about this at the event that we have today is just showing that it's moving forward. And really, we're the ones that are driving it forward. All right, so the science of cannabis. So CBD and THC. Has anybody ever heard these terms before? Cannabidiol, delta-9 THC. So there's over 100 different cannabinoids in the plant. So for time purposes today, we're just going to talk about the CBD and the THC. So the THC, you get really good pain management benefits from it. You get really, it helps with muscle spasticity. It's going to help stimulate appetite. It's going to help with sleep. But at the same time, you sometimes get what people call the high or impaired from it. On the flip side, you have something that's called CBD, cannabidiol. So CBD, good anti-inflammatory properties. Doctor right before us, anti-inflammatory, right? So good anti-inflammatory properties, good pain management properties, good relaxation properties, but you do not get the negative side effect of impairment, which is the biggest difference between medical cannabis and the recreational and the stuff on the street, is that you have the potential to tailor your program so that you don't get negative side effect of impairment from it. So like, for example, when you're talking about CBD, THC, and these are all theories that are going around, but the combination of those two together have proven to have more efficacy and more medicinal benefit than each of them independently or isolated. I think that's definitely the difference between things like synthetic Marinol, where they've isolated the THC, and things like the cannabis plant, where there's definitely a distinct difference. They call it the entourage effect. So really, the most important thing to start thinking about is what is the ratio of CBD to THC that you want to administer to either treat your pain or to treat your condition. So like a perfect example is that if you have 1 milligram of CBD and 1 milligram of THC, that's a 1-to-1 ratio. If you have 2 milligrams of CBD, 1 milligram of THC, 2-to-1 ratio. So the most important thing behind these ratios is that once you get to a 3-to-1 ratio or higher, CBD to THC, you're almost completely diminishing the side effects of impairment. So what does that mean? People like us who are in pain all day long and we still need to take our medication, we could do it with cannabis and we could do it and still function and still live our lives. So definitely, we could talk about this all day, but we're keeping it, just THC and CBD are the most important things to start looking at and to start thinking about as patients. All right, the endocannabinoid system. So this is fascinating. So there's actually a physiology behind why this works. So we have something that's called our endocannabinoid system. It's made up of CB1 receptors and CB2 receptors. So CB1 receptors are found more in the brain. CB2 receptors found more in the peripheral body and the immune system. So the most important thing is that the way that these work with the cannabinoids, they're going to work together with the goal of talking to the immune system, talking to the nervous system, to establish homeostasis or balance. So I know that we're all familiar with a nervous system out of balance. That's when we have things like chronic pain. That's when we get things like multiple sclerosis. That's where we get things like CRPS. When we have an immune system that's out of balance, that's when we see things like lupus. That's where we see things like multiple sclerosis. That's where we see things like Crohn's disease. So this endocannabinoid system, which is made up of CB1, CB2 receptors, really plays the role of a security guard to make sure that the nervous system and the immune system are maintaining homeostasis or balance. And the way that it works is that when one ingests cannabis, the THC, the cannabinoids, are going to seek out these receptors. It's going to fit into the receptors like a lock fits into a key. And what it does is then it sends a signal. Immune system, nervous system, don't have to be out of balance. We want to establish balance. So it's amazing how that works. What's even more amazing, and they didn't discover this till the 90s, which is why it's not in a lot of medical curriculums. A lot of healthcare professionals don't know a lot about this because we just broke the ice on this in the 90s. But the most fascinating thing about it was that they found out that we also have things that are called endocannabinoids. So the same way that THC and CBD works on these receptors, we have internal compounds, anandamide, 2-AG, that do the same exact thing. So scientists were fascinated by the fact that we have compounds that are working together with the system, and an external compound that's found in a plant does the same exact thing that we have internally going on with us. Fascinating. Almost like we were made to ingest cannabis, some of the theories say. And it makes sense why cannabis has migrated with us for 5,000 years everywhere that humans have gone in the world. Amazing. All right, so the CB1 receptors. So like we were talking about, the CB1 receptors, mostly in the brain, higher concentrations in the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. But the most important thing about this is that in the spinal cord, there's a very, very low concentration of these receptors. So why that's important is because, like for example, with opiate overdose, is anybody familiar with what happens with breathing when somebody's taking too many opiates or when opiate overdose? Breathing gets slower. It gets more labored, right? So there's not a lot of these CB1 receptors, low concentration in that spinal cord. Spinal cord is what correlates with breathing. It's what correlates with autonomic function. So because we have a low amount of those receptors, it's impossible to overdose from cannabis, almost impossible. Liz and I have a colleague that, she went to a seminar, her name is Megan, and she, a doctor was talking about to take a lethal dose of cannabis, you have to ingest 1,500 pounds in less than 15 minutes. Impossible. For those of us that know about cannabis and we're familiar with what it looks like, this is an impossible task. I don't care who says they can do it, never possible. So, point being with that, that's why it's such a safe profile because you can't overdose from it, which is the exact opposite of the opioid receptor system. High concentration of opioid receptors in that spinal cord, which heightens the risk for respiratory depression. So cannabis is not going to do that for you. Very safe from what we're seeing. And really, that's the number one thing that I'm seeing different, in the dispensaries versus when I was in healthcare. When I was in healthcare, I worked with a family physician, and we would do a phenomenal job working with people. We would get them out of pain. But you know what? We would see them 3 weeks later, and then they would be nauseous. we would take care of their nausea. And we would see them 3 weeks later, they would have headaches. And then we would take care of their headaches. And then 3 weeks later, they would be in pain again. So it was like the hamster wheel of healthcare was what I called it. Where with cannabis, because of the safety, because of the profile, because it's an herb, because it's natural, because it's not synthetic, I haven't seen that. And people are benefiting. It's amazing. All right, so the medical cannabis administration methods. So definitely, and the number one question that I usually ask patients when they start with us is, are you familiar with cannabis? A lot of people say, yes, of course. I went to see Led Zeppelin in the 70s. Of course I'm familiar with cannabis. I stop them right there. I say, hey, things are a little bit different nowadays. And really what it boils down to is the administration methods. Liz and I do this. We talk to a lot of people. We're all over the place. And a lot of people think that medical cannabis patients smoke joints all day and they're walking around high all day. Definitely not the case. Like we already talked about with the CBD, there's ways to control that negative side effect of impairment. With the administration methods, there's many different ways of taking your medicine. So we'll start left and we'll go to right. The first one, is going to be an oral ingestion. What I like to call that is tinctures. So like we had started, back in the 1900s, early 1900s, that's what physicians were prescribing. But a tincture is a liquid that's infused with the cannabis that you administer sublingually or under the tongue. So you would put it underneath, you would hold it for about 30 to 60 seconds. That's how your medication absorbs, and you're done. So a very popular option for patients. A lot of people have an aversion to smoking. Maybe they've never smoked in their lives and they don't want to start. So the tincture is going to be a good option for that. Now with the tincture, that's going to take anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes to kick in. As far as daily dosing, you could have up to 3 administrations of a tincture a day. It's going to last anywhere from an hour to 3 hours. So you get pretty good effects from the tinctures. What's also good about the tinctures is that you can microdose. So what I mean by that is there's a philosophy with cannabis where you want to try to figure out the least amount of cannabis that you can ingest for the most amount of therapeutic benefit, right? So, and that's, definitely, there's a whole talk on that, but that's what you can do with the tincture. You could, instead of taking a whole eyedropper, you just take 1 drop. Really, it's very little medication that you're trying to use. So from there, we have inhalation or traditional smoking. So I know a lot of the time smoking gets a bad rap, but the good thing about smoking is that it's very fast acting, right? So when you're in pain and you need that relief within a matter of seconds to minutes, that's where the smoking. Because like we said, the tincture, you put that under your tongue, you're waiting a half hour to 60 minutes, right? And when you're in chronic pain, when you're in a bad flare, right, 30 to 60 minutes sometimes seems like 30 to 60 days, right? So that's where the smoking is gonna come into play, very fast acting. What they've also learned is that if you heat the cannabis to a certain temperature, you're gonna activate the cannabinoids, it's gonna turn to a vapor or a steam, and then you could inhale your medication that way. It's called vaporization. So definitely, anybody that has any history of lung irritation or bronchitis or COPD, that's going to be a better way with the vaporization. It's not as harsh on the lungs. It's also not as pungent of a smell. A lot of the times when we smoke or we burn cannabis, we associate it with a very pungent, strong smell, or with the vaporization, we're not going to have that type of smell. Going over, we have edibles. So edibles, very popular. This is, they come in chocolates, they come in, caramel chews, they come in different gummies. But the main thing about the edibles is that they're very long lasting. So like, for example, if it's a day where, I'm going to be out all day, I'm going to be presenting in the afternoon, and then we're going to be doing a question and answer panel afterwards, something like an edible that's going to last 5 to 8 hours is going to be more applicable. Right? So, that's the good thing. Now, the bad thing about the edibles is that they take a longer time to kick in, depending who you are, sometimes 1 to 2 hours. With the edibles, you have to be cautious, because what I've learned is that, one of the hardest things in life is patience, right? So what we hear from people sometimes is that, they'll take an edible, and, 15 minutes, not feeling anything. Take another 15 minutes. Man, I'm getting impatient. Let me take another one. And next thing you know, they are laid out for 2 days cursing cannabis, never wanting to use it ever again because they have slept and they have had a bad experience. So, point being, you got to be careful with the edibles. They have such a powerful medicinal property to them, but you got to be careful. What Liz and I always say is you start low and you go slow with any of these. Now, the last one that we have is topicals. So the topicals are extremely popular with pain, right? Because you apply it locally. You apply it right to that area that you're experiencing pain, whether it's on the hand, so like rheumatoid arthritis patients, fibromyalgia patients, CRPS patients. We are seeing people get their lives back from some of these products. The cool thing about these products is that you don't just pick one. Working together with your patient care rep in the dispensary, you come up with an arsenal based on who you are, what you need, what your functionality has to be for the day, and most importantly, what you prefer. That's the biggest difference that I've seen, is that in the medical cannabis industry, it's not the type of industry where we tell you what to do. You are proactive in your process. We require that proactivity out of you because you're going to have a better patient experience. I would see it all the time when I was back in healthcare, is that the patients that just wanted the pill, they just wanted that quick fix. The doctor before me was talking about, being, in there and being, educated about your stuff. But the ones that wanted the quick fix were coming back 3 months later looking for the next quick fix. And they come back 3 months later looking for the next one. The ones that are engaged, they're educated, they're proactive in their process, those were the people that were really changing their life and getting success. So definitely, to sum all this up, the history of cannabis, the 70 years that we know of it and the demonization of it is just a drop in the bucket compared to the 5,000 years it's been around, right? So do the percentage and the fraction. This is just 70 years, a little snapshot, versus this medication being around for 5,000 years for people. As far as the science behind it, there's science behind why this actually works with the endocannabinoids and the cannabis. And then like we talked about, there's many different ways to administer your medication. It's changing lives, it's saving lives. I'm fortunate to be a part of it, and it's just amazing. So please spread the word and let people know. So that's my part on cannabis. Now on to Liz for the program.
Okay, very good, Mike.
Cool.
Very good. Okay, so we're going to kind of go through what this program is highly regulated, and there's a lot of different steps involved. So this is where I'm going to kind of come in and fill you in, if indeed you want to get the medical card down the road. So these are the units of government that manage this program, with the Illinois Department of Public Health as number one. I know this is a terribly hard screen to read, but these are all the qualifying conditions with the program. So if you have one of these qualifying conditions, you qualify for the medical cannabis card. We do have a booth out here, and I have a list of all the qualifying conditions at our booth if you want to stop by. Most recently, as young as 10 days ago, the governor approved post-traumatic stress disorder and terminal illness to the program, which is great news. So again, if you have any of these, you do qualify for the cannabis card. This just changed as well. 11 days ago, the application fee was $100, and it would last 1 year. Part of the application process is patients have to get fingerprinted. Now the program changed to, it's $300, but your card lasts for 3 years. If you are on Social Security disability or a vet, it would be $150, and again, it lasts for 3 years versus 1. Again, all patients off the bat have to get fingerprinted first time around. After that, in 3 years, you never have to get fingerprinted. And you have to get a doctor certification form, which I'm going to go into that in a moment. But in 3 years, when you're renewing your card, if you were a card patient, you don't have to get fingerprinted and you don't have to get another doctor certification. So this is kind of a big change that just happened about 2 weeks ago. So obviously 2 proofs of Illinois residency, color copy, and a doctor certification, which again, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that. The program also adopted what's called a caregiver program. So obviously there's a lot of patients out there that are too ill to go to a dispensary to pick up their medicine. So a patient can assign a caregiver. Program just changed as well. It used to be $25, but now it's $75 for the application. But again, that's for 3 years. The caregiver has to go through the same process, get fingerprinted and all that, but minus the doctor certification form, because obviously they're not ill. So it's a nice option for the program, without a doubt. A lot of people, as these are just some top questions that we get often, so I just wanted to address them. A lot of people ask, well, where can I use my cannabis? In the law, it's very important to note, it needs to be in a private residence. I always say not Dunkin' Donuts, not McDonald's, it needs to be in a private residence. However, in the law, if you are in a privately owned healthcare facility, so a nursing home, a long care facility, even a hospital, in the law it states that you are able to ingest your medicine there. Now, I don't know of any hospital here in Illinois that is allowing cannabis as a means of medicine. However, I know thousands of, and if not hundreds and thousands of nursing homes and long-term care facilities that do. So it's really going to be up to that facility, even though in the law it says it's okay, it's going to be up to that facility. How do you transport? It's very important to note when you, well, at least in PharmaCannis, when you leave our dispensaries, we have what's called an exit bag. So you're going to put your medicine in the exit bag, zip it up. It's child-proofed and smell-proof. It's important to note when you leave a dispensary, any dispensary, your medicine cannot be in reach. So it needs to be in the back seat, and we recommend, if any, really, to put it into the trunk. If you're taking public transportation from a dispensary, that's fine. You're not behind the wheel. You have your medical cannabis card. Again, our bags anyway are smell-proof. You can put it in your purse or whatever, just carry it. So it is nondescript. It's important to note, too, that your medicine needs to stay in Illinois. End of story. If you're going, there are states that, Mike, and where is Mike? Yeah, there are states, there you are. There are states that do have reciprocity. For example, if you're living in California and going to Arizona, you can carry your medicine. Here in Illinois, it needs to stay in Illinois. However, we were just reading just this morning, there are states, Michigan, what was it, Nevada, and one other. If you have an Illinois medical cannabis card here, can't take your medicine out of Illinois, but you can go to Michigan and use your card in Michigan. We just heard this morning. So, yeah. So, and we so that's kind of good news. And then sadly, who's excluded? Police, fire, correctional officers, school bus drivers, and anyone with a CDL license, or truck driver, that. So, so that is just some general, I'm going to pass through that one. Okay, so Mike already touched on this. It's important to note that your doctor is not writing a prescription. All they're doing is certifying you as a patient that you have one of those 41 qualifying conditions. As a patient, you're allowed 2.5 ounces every 14 days. Now, does anyone have any idea how much that is? I had no idea either, but I found out. And imagine 2 small Ziploc bags of cannabis and a half every 14 days. That's a lot. And this 2.5 ounces was established by the state. I don't know, we have hundreds of patients that come through our doors, and I don't know anyone who's even kind of approached that amount in a 14-day period. So maybe an ounce, and just to kind of give you some, we get this question, well, how much is this costing? This is a cash business because it's not federally approved. So on average, our patients spend about $100 to $150 a month. So it's not, and what we're definitely seeing too, is patients are, well, there's a lot of our patients aren't taking a lot of opioids for their pain and chronic pain and that. So what we're seeing is once patients start taking the medical cannabis, they're naturally not needing those opioids, and they're naturally not needing to pay for those opioids. So it's kind of a good thing. Designated dispensary. So what does that mean? So when you apply for the card, actually even on the application it says pick a dispensary. So PharmaCannis, for example, PharmaCannis Schaumburg. So it's important that you have to put that down there to have the application complete. You're going to send your application to the state. You'll go to PharmaCannis, for example, in Schaumburg. We hope you always stay there. But there's reasons why you might want to move. Maybe you move downstate or whatever it may be. You can absolutely change dispensaries. There's a form on Illinois Department of Public Health's website that says change dispensary. You email it to them or fax it to them. 24 hours later, you can go to that new dispensary. And this is really because this is a highly regulated program. And you as a patient, if you go into a dispensary, and let's say you order an eighth of an ounce of cannabis, it's going to go into our system. It's going to feed down into the state. The state's going to know on October 15th at 2:15 in the afternoon, you bought an eighth of cannabis. This is for their tracking system. If patients were just bouncing around, they couldn't keep up. So that's the reason why you have to pick a dispensary. And it's important to note that. Okay, Physicians. I started with PharmaCannis about a year ago, and I'll have to tell you, a year ago, physicians didn't want anything to do with this. They didn't understand it. They were scared. A year later, it's funny how things have changed, because a year later, they're not all on board. They don't get it, but we're definitely at a 50-50, which is a huge progress. What's important to really note, though, is if you have, well, we always recommend, first of all, talk to your physician first. Say if you are interested in exploring this as an alternative medicine. If for whatever reason your physician is not on board or doesn't understand, we have a number of physicians that here over the past year that are definitely on board. But what's really important to note is part of the law is you have to have a bona fide relationship with that doctor in order for him to certify you. And what does that mean? They need, you need to have, the physician, the new physician needs to have at least 12 months of your medical records. The physicians that we know typically require you to revisit, after that first, if you have to go to a new one, that is, revisit every 3 months. It all depends on your condition. But you need to keep that bona fide relationship if you had to go to another doctor. And we are getting almost done here. And this is just a quick glimpse into our dispensaries. Again, we have 4 of them. We are by no means a head shop. We are more, I always get a laugh out of that, everywhere I go. Just imagine almost a doctor's office with a little spa feel with a security guard. With a security guard. The only people who can get in and out of the dispensary, in any dispensary, is one who has a medical cannabis card, a caregiver, or obviously an employee. Those are the only people who can get in. So it's important to note that. So, and a lot of people, it's funny, I was in our Evanston dispensary, and a lot of people are peering in, the window. So, but you need the card in order to. That's good. All right, thank you.